And so Joseph's question is about the output against direction, right? So normally we can see that we have an output here, right? So this output in direction is set to 1. That's the default setting. And let me switch my indicator to match what I have on the chart, right? So I have the EMA 55 on the chart. Alright, so there we go. So now we can see the output here matches my red moving average. Either it's going to be sloping up or sloping down. Right? So, right, so the output is in, matches in the direction of the moving average or your indicator, right? So if we need to reverse that for some reason, if we need to get a reversed output, right, which is slightly different than inverting. So inverting is slightly different. This actually reverses. We can use, put a 1 there, and now we can see the output has been reversed, right? So our moving average is sloping down, and the output is long. And so Joseph's question is about, the labeling of the minimum slope and the maximum slope. And, keep in mind, this is kind of a universal solver. It's not, so these settings aren't specific to either a short side or a long side. Right, so the minimum and max slope, it's literally just checking the amount of slope. So it's not pertinent to the long slope or a short slope. It's just looking at, it's just a way that you can make sure that there's a certain amount of slope. So what you could do is, let's see what happens if I put 1 tick in there. That might be too much. Yeah, 1 tick is usually pretty steep. Once again, it depends on the indicator, and it depends on price, how much volatility there is in the market. And since I'm using range bars, right, that kind of limits the volatility. But we can see that we got 1 bar here where our moving average was sloping down at least 1 tick. So that's really steep, right, compared to the rest of the time. We can see there's no output the rest of the time. And right, if we look down here at BloodHound, we can see there is some output, but it's very little. And then finally we get an output down here that's enough to trigger, right, one of these racing bars here. And this is universal. It doesn't pertain to the short side or the long side. Right? And oh, hold on, oh, here's where that's why it's red. Should have turned both of these off, and there we go. That makes more sense. So yeah, now we can see there's no output. So let me lower this slope requirement there. All right, there we go. So half a tick is a little more reasonable for most, I guess, moving averages. So there we go. So we can see that, we know when the EMA is sloping down, pretty significantly by half a tick or more, I should say. And right, so whether we're checking, in direction or against direction, keep in mind that these outputs sections here are just a way of reversing the output of the solver. And the max slope, is literally like it says. It's just making sure that there's a certain amount of slope in your indicator. So, like, using the maximum slope is one way, that you can filter out kind of flat areas, right? So we could use this so that our system, only trades, how about if I lower the number a little bit, So we could use, you know, 0.3 ticks in this case, you know, to make sure that the system only trades when our EMA has a pretty good slope on it. And we can see here, you know, when it flattens out, you know, there's no signal. Right? So when it flattens out, it would prevent any kind of trade signals if we used this, you know, this slope solver in your system. So we could also do kind of the opposite logic. We could look for the opposite kind of condition. So let's say for some reason we want to identify when our moving average is flat. So let me put 0.3 ticks in the small amount, and actually I should put 0.3 ticks in the maximum as well. And then instead of looking for a, let me stretch this out. So instead of looking for a slope that's greater than a third of a tick, and looks like it's hasn't updated, but we want to look for a slope that's less than a third of a tick. So I could turn this off, and then I can set this to 1, right, and I think set that to 1, and so now we can see, right, the solver is identifying when we're in these flat areas here, right, when we're in these kind of flat areas. And most likely, if you're trying to detect when you're kind of in a flat area, if you want to know when you're in a flat area, you probably want to use the against direction as well, right? So that way you're getting a long and a short out. Because if you're detecting a flat area, usually you don't know what, so I guess as an example, you know, if you're detecting a flat area, you know, such as in here, I know some people like to look, you know, they look for price consolidating for a certain amount of time, you know, and then after a while they're going to expect a breakout to one direction or the other, right? And so here we can see we had a little consolidation, and then finally we got a breakout, right? But this breakout direction, right, you never know, of course, which way it's going to break. So, you know, if you don't know, if you're just kind of detecting a condition, usually you want to have a long and a short output to identify a condition. So this isn't a trade signal, it's just identifying, you know, when your moving average is flat, trying to, you know, help you identify when you were in consolidation. So, you know, so there could be some trading rules out there that say, you know, look for consolidation first, and then the second condition is look for the breakout. And so as your first condition, you would want both a long and a short output, and then you wait for the breakout, and then the breakout would filter it to a long signal only, right? So Joseph, I hope that kind of answers your question there and a little more. Kind of went a little further into that question than I planned on, but actually I think I'll just leave this. Yeah, and let me name this template file here. All right, so there we go. I used the change button to name my BloodHound template there. All right, so Jim is asking, how do you change the default strategy and settings in Raven? So I don't suggest you guys do this. And it can create problems down the road because NinjaTrader doesn't know how to handle when. Well, I guess here let me bring up the indicators here, right? So what Joseph is talking about is in the indicator, right, in your indicator window. Oh, you know how you can right click, right, and then set a default for any indicator, right? So you can like predefine your indicators and change, right? And you can change all the plot colors and anything like that, right? So, for example, my SMA, if I add my SMA on here, you know, I created a set default because I like to make it a little thicker, and I like to set it to white, so it automatically pops up as white instead of whatever the other color was. So let's see, let's remove that. So you can do the same thing in your strategy window, right? So if we pull up our strategy and you bring up Raven, you can do the same thing for a strategy. You can use the set default. However, if the strategy changes or if the indicator changes, right? If new parameters are added to the strategy or to the indicator, NinjaTrader doesn't know how to handle those changes, and so you can get error messages. So I really don't suggest that you do this, especially for Raven. So I've seen this happen. Customers do this where they'll have a file loaded. So they'll go in here and they'll set up, you know, their favorite system that they're working on, right? And then they'll create a set default, which is convenient because when you do that, it loads up this BloodHound file every single time you add Raven to the list. But what happens is, if you change the name of this file, or, you know, like 3 months down the road you change the name of the file, you know, you add a date to the file name, or you just scrap it all together, you delete the file, right? So if this file doesn't show up, then you get error messages because NinjaTrader doesn't know what to do when this file is missing, right? So NinjaTrader is trying to use your set default settings, right, to change everything, and NinjaTrader can't find this file, it doesn't know what to do, and it just kind of complains about it. So I really recommend that you don't use the set default, right? I know it saves some time, but eventually it's going to start throwing up error messages. Yeah. So anyways, I mean, that's how you do it there, Jim, but I don't recommend it. Okay, so Jim actually wants to remove it. Okay, so yeah, that's kind of the next thing I was going to cover. So if you do accidentally do that and you need to remove that set default file, here's how you do it. So go into your documents, go into NinjaTrader 7, and let's see, go into templates, right? So all those set default files are stored in this templates folder. That's what this templates folder is for, right? So you can see this is where your chart templates go. And your indicators, so this is where your indicator set defaults go. So if I look in my indicator folder, right, we can see, where's there's my SMA set default file. You know, I have one for my swings, highs, lows, and you know, a lot of the indicators I use a lot. There's the EMA, right? I change the colors, make them thicker, so they pop up on my chart quicker, and I don't have to go and change the colors and the thickness of the plot line. And of course, there's the same thing you have a strategies folder. All right, so we're looking inside my documents, NinjaTrader 7, templates, and then inside the strategy folder. And so inside the strategy folder there, Jim, you'll see SI Raven, and just delete the file, right? So these files here, you can just delete them. They're nothing important, right? So if I delete my SMA file there, like so, and then I go back to my chart and I bring up my indicator window, and let me scroll down to the SMAs. So now when I add my SMA, I can see here now it went back to orange, which is the actual original default color there for the SMA. So let me just kind of undo this. I'm just going to set that back to white, put that back to 3, and then save a default there. And if I look back in my folder here, my file directory, there's my SMA. It just literally got recreated right there, right today. So, right, the date here, you can see it's the 23rd at 10:34. So it literally just got recreated right now. So you can go into the strategy folder, delete any set defaults for your strategies. If you have if you're getting error messages when you're putting indicators on your chart, you might want to go in and delete the file in this indicator folder, and that might get rid of that error message. Alright, so what Richard is looking for is he wants to determine when, here's a good example. So he wants to know when the slope of the MACD, right, so the blue line is the MACD, he wants to know when the slope of the MACD line is greater than the slope of the average line. Right, so we can see this, the MACD is rising faster than the average line is rising. Yeah. So Richard, to compare two slopes, you actually need an indicator that calculates that slope value. Right, so the slope solver doesn't calculate the slope value. Let's see, actually, you know what, that's what the difference is. That's right. So remember the MACD histogram, or the MACD difference, remember, is the delta, right? So it's you take the, what is it, the MACD minus the average, and that gives you the histogram. So let's see. Yeah, so if the histogram is rising, yeah, we know that the MACD is rising faster than the histogram. And yeah, I'm just thinking this through and looking at some examples here. Right, yeah. Okay, so let's look at this area here so we can see that, right, the histogram is falling, and probably need to stretch this out, stretch the MACD out, so we can see it. Okay, yeah, so I think, stretching out the indicator, we can see that the average is rising faster than the MACD is, right? And so we can see that the histogram is sloping down. So I think, just looking at the histogram tells you when the MACD is rising faster than the average line is. Yeah, so that's good. So that math has already been done. So I think really all that you're looking at, Richard, is we're looking at the slope of the MACD. Let's see. All right. Yeah, so to do this, it's going to take a couple of solvers to do this. So let me switch over to the logic board here. And let's see. Alright, so we want the MACD. Alright, so we want to know when the MACD is rising faster than the average. Okay. Alright, just a sec while I Okay, do a little cleanup here. All right. So, all right, we're working on the default time frame here. So you'll notice that under the solvers nodes, right, we have existing nodes. So I can see all the solvers that I've created already, right, on the default time frame and on the weekly time frame. All right, so if we look at the solver tab, right, we can see I have three solvers already existing on the default time frame and a support resistance on the weekly time frame. So as we look at the solver nodes here under existing nodes, right, there we go. So if I want to create a new node, right, if I look at the default time frame, there's all the new solvers, and I can create new solvers under the weekly time frame as well. So, all right, so but our MACD is on the default time frame, which is our, let's see, our daily chart. So we're going to be looking at the slope of the MACD, right? So we're looking at the slope of the MACD, and essentially we want to know when the MACD is rising. And let me scale this again a little bit. Yeah. Okay, so we want to know when the MACD is rising above the zero line. So that's kind of another key element, is the histogram has to be above the zero line and rising to know that your MACD is rising faster in an upward direction, right? And so the opposite is true for the MACD. Yeah, here's a good example. So the opposite is true for the MACD when the MACD is falling. So we can see right there, the histogram is falling, and the MACD, there we go, and the MACD is sloping down faster than the average line is sloping down. Right? So when the histogram is sloping down, it needs to be below zero. And when the histogram is sloping up, it needs to be above zero. So let's just take a look at the slope of the histogram, the MACD histogram. That's the first condition we'll build. Alright, so we're looking at the difference, and alright, I should probably make the histogram look a little brighter so it shows up against the racing stripes. And yeah, there we go. Alright, so right now we can just see when the histogram is sloping down versus when the histogram is sloping up. So when the MACD is rising, I don't think you're probably not interested in, you don't want to know when, let's see, when the histogram is sloping down. So if the MACD is rising, we're only interested in when the histogram is rising above the zero line when the MACD is rising. So what we need to do is add another filter, making sure that that when the histogram is rising, that it's above the zero line, and that will filter out these short signals here. Alright, so to check if the histogram is above or below 0, there's two ways we can do this. We could use the threshold, or we could use the comparison, and I'm going to use the threshold. I think it's probably a little quicker and easier. And sorry, let me label these. Alright, so that's looking at the MACD's difference slope. And this is going to be looking at the MACD diff, let's see, above or below 0. Alright, so let's put the MACD indicator in here. So there we go, is our MACD, and we want to look at the difference plot. And we want to know if it's above or below 0. So we can leave all of our thresholds at 0, right? And so we're looking for a long output when it's greater than 0, greater than A. Remember, A equals 0. So we want a long output when we're greater than 0. And a short output when it's less than 0. There we go. We can see the MACD is, or the diff, the histogram is below 0, or the histogram is above 0. Alright. So let's take a look at that slope solver again, right? So here's the slope solver. So we want to remove, we're not interested in the short output, in the short output when the histogram is above 0. So what we'll do is we will AND these two together. So we'll connect those together with an AND node and take a look at that AND node there. And there we go. So we can see the all those short outputs disappeared when the histogram is above the 0 line. And so now we can see we're identifying, this is identifying when the MACD is rising faster than the average is. So we can see in this area the average line is rising faster than the MACD line is. So, alright, I think that does it. And well, we'll take a look at the short side quickly. Yeah, so we can see here in this area the MACD is falling faster than the average line is, but right here we can see that the average line is falling faster than the MACD line is. Actually, in fact, the MACD is kind of sloping up, so and it filtered it out. So alright, Richard, I think that takes care of your question. I think that's what you're looking for there. Yeah, here's a little tip for you guys. When you're building, your logic out, you can actually rename the AND and the OR nodes, so that way you kind of know what this AND node is doing. Right, so like I could, rename it to, filtered output, something like that. Whatever kind of name makes sense to you. So you can see I renamed this AND node. So I can basically, that naming it kind of tells me what's coming out of that AND node. So it's kind of a good way to keep track of what certain things are doing as you're building out a system here. Okay, so Eric has a question about Raven. So he'd like to set up one contract with a profit target, and a second contract he wants to leave it as a runner with a trailing stop. So Eric, Raven is only capable of all in and all out. So Raven doesn't allow you to break up your contracts. So if you're trading with 2 contracts or 3 contracts, either you're all in or all out. So that's with Raven's default settings. So if you wanted to run one contract on a profit target, another one on a runner, you would want to set up an ATM. Right? So you'll want to define yourself an ATM to do that. And then in Raven, you can tell Raven to run your ATM. Okay, before I go too far, let's see. Let me look up my ATMs here that I have. Actually, I guess I can just turn the chart trader on. Alright, so let's see. I have several ATMs here. Alright, so I have, here's an ATM that says using 7 contracts. Alright, so I've got a target of, actually, how about if I'll do the target of 20 ticks, a stop of 10, and the quantity 7. Let's see. Alright, so in order to get Raven on this chart, I need to turn the chart trader off, and then now you can see my strategies are re-enabled again. So, actually, hold on. Let me, to give an example here, I need to, let me change my chart. I will need to switch to another chart. Yep. Since this chart has weekly data on it, I need to switch to another chart. Alright, we'll switch to this chart. And let's see, let's just change this to how about a 4-range chart. Alright, I'm going to take BloodHound off this chart. And yeah. Alright, so I have a nice clean chart and a 4-range bar, so we should be getting lots of signals on this here. Okay, so let's pull up Raven. Right. And I'm going to load up a test, kind of a test file that I have here. And in this I have a very simple solver here. This solver here just looks to see when the closing price of the bar reverses. So it's the inflection solver. Alright, so I'm using the inflection solver and I'm just having it look at the closing price. So whenever the closing price, reverses direction, up, down, that's when I'm going to get a trade signal to enter in. So this will give lots of trade signals to Raven for just to generate some good examples, or a quick example. Alright, so click OK. So I'm going to change my entry logic to the price inflection logic template. And alright, so to use an ATM, right here, the managed trades using, we're going to change this over to ATM. And I type in the name, so it's BloodHound, and my target is 20, and the stop is 10, and the quantity is 7. So this is the name of my ATM. Alright. And let's see, I think all I need to do is turn it on. Alright, there we go. So keep in mind, you already need to have an ATM defined. Okay, so let's see. the closing price is moving up, and as soon as it reverses down, I should get a trade signal here. So hopefully that happens soon.
Order filled.
Oh, there we go. And oh, well, okay. Sorry, this ATM doesn't have any runners, but we can see. Oh, actually, sorry, it does. There we go. That's right, it does have a runner. Okay, cool. So hopefully price will come down. Oil's been moving down for the last few months. Hopefully we can get oil to move down the next few seconds and take out our first target, and then you'll see the remaining contracts will just be trailing here. Come on, there we go. One more tick.
Target filled.
And there, now we can see my stop move to break even, right? And that was all controlled by the ATM that I set up. All right, so Eric, just set yourself up an ATM and you can do that. So, all right, and so keep in mind you have to have your
order filled.
Oh, and you have to have your ATMs already predefined before you can put them into Raven. Okay, so and I just use a very simple naming convention, right? The name of my ATM, which is BloodHound, and then I put T for target, S for my stop, and Q for the quantity of contracts. So a simple naming convention there. And let's see, alright, Stefan also has a follow-up question here. When using Raven, if I change the drop down to a different logic, does it change the actual strategy or just the chart display? Okay, yeah, that's a good question here. Let's see. So right now, the way I have it set up right now, let's see, I'll enable it back on again. But if I pick something different, let's see. There we go. Okay, so we can see basically, right, the output here has constant signals, you know, almost constant signals, only a couple of bars, there's actually no signal. And so we can see I'm not getting a trade right now. So the way I had Raven set up, I can change this to whatever I want to look at. And it's not going to affect what Raven is trading. So I'll put it back on this one here. So if you want to be able to change the logic template that Raven is using to enter the trade on, what you have to do is, let's see, let me disable that. We'll open up our strategy. And you can see right here in the logic, the entry logic, I actually specified, right, a logic template. So there's actually a name in there. So that locks Raven to trading this only. Right? So I can change this pull down menu to anything I want, but Raven is locked in to trading only this logic template there. Alright. So let me disable this strategy. Now if I change my entry logic, if I set it to none and then re-enable it, now I can use the pull down menu to change what Raven will trade live. Right? So if I change this, it's going to change what Raven trades live. So I have to wait for another signal to come through first. But if we get another down bar, take a look at this.
Order filled.
There we go.
Order filled.
And then I can,
Order filled.
let's see, Probably don't have any good example. Yeah, there we go. Okay. And so now, if I changed it to this one called 2 bars, now Raven's going to start trading these signals as they come in. So, all right. So the key to be able
order, fill.
be able to use this pull-down menu to change the entry logic. Remember, the key was when I'm setting up Raven, I leave my entry logic to none. All right. So there's no pull-down menu for the exit logic. So if you're using an exit logic, that gets locked in, and there's no way to change that. The way that you change your exit logic is you just have to go into the strategy and disable it and change it and then re-enable it. So happy Friday. Have a good weekend, and I hope to see you guys all next Friday.